great morning of it. I'm Kathy Lewis. I am very privileged to serve as Executive Director of the Civic Leadership Institute. We had a great day yesterday with the new class of 2013. And if you are a member of the class of 2013 and your mouth is not full of eggs and bacon, would you mind just standing up for a moment and letting us recognize those of you who are in the class of 2013? I will tell you, those of you who've been in past classes, you don't usually do a social activity on the first night of the opening retreat. We tried something new this year, and we went to Jillian's. Some of you were just disturbingly having fun with the shoot-'em-up games, a little alarming. And Karen Meyer was the one who did the best at the basketball, so that was amazing. Yeah, she would not, I will just say this, she would not be the first round draft pick in the NBA. I'll say that about Karen. So it was a great evening, it was loads of fun, and we got back about 9:30 last night, and we said, those of us who are on the staff said, okay guys, we're going to bed. There's a bar, if you wish, at the Loft Hotel across the street. I thought maybe we'd have 5 or 10 people roll up over there. Oh no, bus rolls up, everybody's over at the Loft. So I don't know how long y'all stayed. I hope it was a good time. I was delighted there was no law enforcement involved, and it's just terrific. Let me introduce you to our staff members. I think many of you know Kristen Spitz. Kristen has just been promoted to our Director of Alumni Engagement. Congratulations. And out of all of the potential employees there were in the United States of America, we managed to hire another Kristen as our program manager. Not only a Kristen, but a Kristen S. Kristen Sawyer is our new program manager. She's a 2012 graduate of Virginia Tech, something she reminds us of daily, but we're okay. It's all good, it's all good. So we're delighted to have you here this morning. I do want to let you know that this is an exciting time for Civic. We have just moved into new office space at the Innovation Research Park at Old Dominion University. We're very happy about that, and very appreciative of our partnership with Old Dominion that has been supporting some of our activities. So thank you to our friends from Old Dominion, Karen and Alonzo and numbers of other people here. Thank you so much. As well, we just finished a strategic planning process, and so we're going to be sharing with you over the course of the coming year the results of that process. On your tables, you'll have some notices about some alumni cafes. We're very hopeful you'll agree to join us in one of these alumni cafes and share your thoughts and ideas about where we go from here. One of the things we are very clear about is that we have an organization of people who are at the top of their game, who have resources or who have command of resources, and who have control over their time, although a lot of them don't believe that, they really do. So we're hopeful that we might be able to marshal those efforts in support of what's great about this region. So those alumni cafes are an opportunity for you to do that. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Andrea McClellan, who has a word or two about our dues process, which we currently have underway. If you are a member of Civic, then you will have received recently an email about that. And if you've not taken that opportunity to pay your dues, you'll get a letter in a few days. So there you go. Good morning.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you all for being here. I think having an alumni program manager is what Civic is all about. I think the alumni, of course, you know, all of your classes are great. Class of 2010 was the best. But, way to represent. All of the classes are great, and the alumni of Civic are the best and the brightest of Hampton Roads. We truly are the leaders of this area, and to be able to get together at programs like these is so special. So beyond attending Civic during your class for all the new folks here, we hope that you'll come back year after year and share your thoughts like we are today. Part of that and how we support that, of course, is through our membership dues. And if on your table, if you happen to see this, there's some great bios of our fabulous 3 speakers today, but there's also an outline of alumni dues. And there are 3 different levels. You can take a look at that and what it gets you. But for me, my husband's also a Civic alumni of 2004, and for us, supporting Civic is very important because we think this is the brain trust of Hampton Roads. And so beyond the opportunity to go to a breakfast, Of course, going to the Darden Awards, there's a big gala coming up in the spring. We know it's the right thing to do. I know you know it's the right thing to do. We have a card reader here. If you have a credit card, we can take it today. You don't have to do it online. We can take checks. We can take cash. But at the end of the day, I really hope that all of you will consider, I know all of you are very philanthropic and you support a lot of organizations, but for us, this is one of the most critical ones in Hampton Roads, and I hope you will consider becoming a member or increasing your membership level. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The other element of that you'll note when you pay your dues, you become a civic fellow. That was something that your alumni and strategic planning committee felt very strongly about. Some designation to say, hey, I'm stepping up, I'm paying my dues, and I'm also engaged in the community life of Hampton Roads. So I hope that as you update your resumes, if you are at that level, that you will list yourself as a civic fellow. On behalf of our board president, Ed Merkel, who is today on his honeymoon from our very first civic wedding we've ever had. It's true. That's another line of business we're going into shortly. Ed Merkel and Dawn Serafine got married about 2 weeks ago, and they're on their honeymoon in Jamaica, so I bring you greetings on behalf of Ed, and I would like to introduce to you our incoming president, Ann Crenshaw, and she's with us this morning on behalf of the board. So thank you, Ann. Gentlemen, if you're ready, we will go ahead and ask you to come to the podium here. We decided that this event that we did last year was really, we called it the Power Breakfast, and Power really liked that idea a whole lot. And we thought it was a terrific opportunity to talk about some of the contemporary issues in Hampton Roads. And your response was so great. We said, we're going to try that format again. And so when you come here in the fall, we will always be talking about what's front and center, what's on our minds, and bringing you new ideas and opportunities. So that's what we're about this morning. I think, Dwight, if we may begin with you, that would be brilliant. Would you join me, please, in welcoming Dwight Farmer, who is the Executive Director of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. As such, he also has authority in the transportation planning process as well. He started out at the HRPDC in 1978. I'm not sure if Elvis was still alive, but that's kind of how I mark a lot of things in my life. But it was 78, the year of the King's death. I'm just going to put that out there for you. But Dwight moved up through the ranks all that time, most of that time. He was also taught in his adjunct faculty at Old Dominion. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dwight Farmer, who has some words for us about transportation.
You should all have a handout at your seat. It's a front and back handout. I'm not going to cover all of this, but I'm going to give you enough just to incite a riot. So all of the transportation officials here, I know, are like Aubrey and Dennis and some others are wearing their armor vests. So let me set the stage. Kathy had indicated we're going to try to do a few minutes each, so I'm going to keep mine to a few minutes, hopefully, and then do a lot of Q&A, which I think works best. On the first slide, which is on page 2, that's the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that number 2. Statewide average gasoline taxes and fees in Virginia rank somewhere around 10th from the bottom nationwide. You flip to 3 and you look at highway expenditures per capita against all of the states, and again, we're ranked somewhere in the bottom 10 or 12. Now the next one is the one that I think is most telling. I can pause this for a moment and tell you why I believe this is happening, but the percentage of transportation funds used for new highway construction, and this is a 2009 figure published nationally, puts us at second from the bottom. I think my voice is tickling as I talk. The reason for this is actually shown on the next slide. The reason we're second from the bottom. If you go to the page marked number 5, you will see from 1988 on this chart through about 2002, the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund. And there are two funds. There are Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund, the HMO fund, and the Transportation Trust Fund. That's for construction, or its intent is for construction. So there's two sets of funds that fund DDOT's entire $4+ billion annual budget. Up until 2002, the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund had surplus monies, hundreds of millions of dollars that would transfer over to the construction fund. 2002, that stopped. The Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund needed all of its revenue generated, and it needed money to come back from the Transportation Trust Fund or the Construction Fund. So for the last few years, the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund, as I would portray it, has raided the Construction Fund to the tune of roughly $500 million per year. That's a serious number. Numbers expected to go, if we do nothing, could go to $700 million. So that's why our expenditures for new highway construction are so low relative to everybody else. Now, I could end on this next slide, and maybe I'll try to do that. In 2017, it appears irrefutably that the state will by then find itself with no state construction funds available. Now, there will be federal construction funds, but there will be no new state construction funds. I was at a meeting with Secretary Knott up in Richmond Chamber Group a couple of weeks ago and reminded Sean that when our chairman had asked him this question of would we indeed run out of money in 2017, his response was, well, it might be 2018. So I would say it's irrefutable. We are also, by 2017, unable to fully match, we'll be unable to fully match federal funds, which means you can't find 20 cents to receive 80 cents from the federal government for your highway construction program. And we'll have insufficient monies in the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund to fully maintain our transportation system the way we would like to maintain it at the standards we've been using for the last 20 to 30 years. Slides 7 and 8, and actually 9, are a collection of pieces of information regarding the urban crescent. We did call it the Golden Crescent, and we thought that might offend some folks in the western part of the state, so we changed our name to the Urban Crescent. And we had, on June 7th, a convergence in Henrico County of almost all of the Urban Crescent mayors and chairmen of the boards, locally elected officials. I think it was an unprecedented meeting where all of these folks came together and agreed that there was a transportation funding problem. And they agreed that we would craft a letter and we would send it with a strong message to the General Assembly, the Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the House, and so forth, and we did. And that letter is out there now, circulating around, essentially indicating that the General Assembly, who are the stewards of this Transportation Trust Fund and the Highway Maintenance and Operating Fund and the revenue that goes in it, needs to take some bold actions. So that initiative is well underway. I think we're going to actually get another meeting here pretty soon and decide what else these folks can do, and I think they're going to agree to meet with some business folks and have a joint discussion about what to do next as we go into the 2013 session. Let me end with page 11, just so that you understand how big $1 billion is. If we had tolls only for a $1 billion hypothetical project, and assuming that on that $1 billion hypothetical project were 50,000 paying customers, if we amortize that with level debt over 50 years, to amortize that $1 billion would cost $4.30 each way for every person using that toll facility. If we wanted to do that $1 billion project only using gas tax, it would take almost 10 cents in a regional gas tax for 50 years to amortize that $1 billion project. If we did sales tax only, it would be 0.5% in a regional sales tax. So again, these are regionally imposed revenue mechanisms for one $1 billion project. And if you did all three of those in combination, you would find yourself with a toll of $1.45, a 3-cent regional gas tax and a 0.2% regional sales tax to do one bidding. The Hampton, W and I were talking about the Hampton Roads crossing, which we haven't made up our mind how to do that yet. That project is probably going to be somewhere between $3.5 and $5 billion. So you can multiply all of these. If you did not so creative financing, and this is the way you have to pay for it. So Kathy, I'm going to end with that.
Fair enough. And we'll do questions and it's probably a good place to end, isn't it? We'll do questions and have a really interactive conversation here in just over here in just a few minutes. The other, just very quickly, Debbie, on the 2017 figure, that means, sorry, Debbie, Dwight, I apologize. Dwight, the 2017, it's pretty bad to ask the guy who hasn't even been talking about it to answer the question. But if anybody could do it, Debbie Wynn could, so I feel fine about that. Dwight, though, on that question, what that means is there's federal funds available, and unless we come up with something on a statewide level, we will not be able to access those federal funds. Is that correct?
That's correct. We'll leave federal funds on the table.
It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Debbie Wynn. I'm going to try this because this is really... Debbie Wynn is the retired chairman. Let's just do this way. Debbie Wynn is the retired chairman of Landmark, and he is also the current chair of the Hampton Roads Community Foundation. There is so much that has been powerful and productive in the Commonwealth that has had the good assistance of Debbie's leadership. He has served on a number of gubernatorial commissions oriented toward the future of Virginia. He is always a compelling speaker who really tells it like it is, and that's what we've asked him to do this morning. And I am very happy to have Debbie with us. First, though, I want to introduce Drew Umbarski. Drew is really a fascinating new player in Hampton Roads. I say new, he graduated from Old Dominion in 2002. He will be honored tonight as a distinguished alumnus of Old Dominion University, so congratulations for that, Drew. Drew is really changing the face of downtown Norfolk with a company that is world-class and having worldwide impact from right here in Hampton Roads, specifically in downtown Norfolk. And what I was hopeful Drew might do this morning is talk a bit about some of the things that he's doing in his business and how we could get more business along the lines of what Drew is talking about. And then we'll come to Debbie and then we'll open the floor. Drew, thank you for being with us this morning.
Yeah, of course. As Kathy mentioned, I started my company out of Old Dominion. I was freelancing, building websites, and found that a lot of people wanted those websites and got people to help me do that. And before I knew it, it was a company. Today, there's 25 of us. We serve as in client relationships with Google and HBO, Sprint, HP, and a number of other Fortune 500 brands. And what I found is through the years, I was always interested in creating more things around me. I thought those were just the things that I was interested in and that I wanted to do, and that I wasn't going to be happy if I couldn't find more culture or more things to do around me. What I've found in the past couple of years in particular, as I've tried to pull from the local talent pool and also try to have talent reconsider locating to the area, that's a business challenge more than it is a personal one. And if we can't retain our best and brightest talent, we certainly can't hope to attract them as well. And so a lot of my efforts individually and with the company have been to try to create those things, those types of amenities and the types of culture that I think attract and retain our most inspired young professionals. And I can say from personal experience that the friends of mine who I know have left this area to go on and do incredible things, and I could tell you about a lot of them. I'll tell you about one. A guy by the name of Archie Coates is right now raising money for a pool in the middle of the Hudson River called the Plus Pool, and the idea is that the water from the river will filter through the sides of the pool and provide a swimmable pool in the middle that will float in the middle of the river. He raised $100,000 from crowdsourcing earlier this year, and he's currently raising $1 million. And there's talks of companies like Nike and others sponsoring the pool. And this guy's from here. he, like 24 others I could name, left this area without a job, and he's self-employed, and he's just making great things for himself and for other people. And those are the types of people that I want to keep here. If I could keep even half of the sort of short list I have in my head, I don't think that the region would be recognizable in terms of just how much more culture and activity we have in just a few years. So I've tried to align myself with as many people doing that as I can, and be an outspoken voice for those types of efforts.
Drew, could you give us a sense of what's happening with regard to, I mean, Drew's doing a very interesting project with some property he owns next door?
That's right.
Oh.
So we, our building is at 427 Granby Street. It's a 3-story building downtown. We did a historic restoration of it. If you head down to Granby Street, you can see it. And we recently bought the building next to us, 429, to expand into, and we realized that a storefront to us wasn't nearly as valuable as it was to the city. And so we sectioned off the back 2/3 of the property and said that's what we're going to grow into. And then we built out, or we're in the process of building out a tenant space in the front, and also a rooftop deck. And basically we held a contest a couple of months ago, and I think that these are the sorts of innovative ideas and out-of-the-box thinking that we need. But we said, I know that people want to be making great things here, and they just need an opportunity. So again, we held this contest. We had 17 proposals come in 7 weeks, and we said, if you can give us an idea that will help change the face of this city and ultimately be a place that people say that's a reason they're going to stay in this area, we'll be the best landlord you've ever had. And I think the rent comes out to $4 a square foot.
Don Critter just had a heart attack.
But it's a Kickstarter, and I've said to the landlords around me, the city officials around me, I know that's not a repeatable model, but that I had 17 proposals in 7 weeks, and we then sent all 16 of those to all of the property owners, all the city officials we possibly could. We also helped the 2 runners up with no interest financing to help them get off the ground as well, and just are trying to get people to start things here.
And what were some of the proposals that you had? I mean, what were some of the ideas that people had? Are you able to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, there were, one of the criteria that most people point to in the RFP, we had this very light RFP, and there are a couple bullet points, and the first one says, if there's anything like it within 75 miles, stop, you don't qualify. And so we had, just all these different things. When I travel all around the country, and in some cases the world, and see things that I just know we don't have. So noodle shops and chopped salad places, and different types of bakery and brew pubs, and all these sort of homespun businesses, none of which would be earth-shattering in their own right, but as we looked at the proposal process at the end, and we thought, what is the leading criteria for us? It was, would someone say, I'm going to stay in this city because that's there? And while that seems a little bit aspirational for a 2,000 square foot restaurant, I would argue that if you look at some of the cities where I know my friends have left to go to without jobs just because they wanted the culture there, easily on their top 10 list of the reasons they would have gone would have been the little hole-in-the-wall donut place that everyone knows about, or the little ice cream shop that has the line around the corner every morning. So those are the types of things we hope to be able to inspire.
Thank you, Drew. Drew, you should know as well, and I'm really happy to have had the opportunity to introduce him to you. Drew, as well, just finished a project with Google where they did a really interesting thing and reimagined some of those iconic advertising slogans of yesteryear. And it was a very, very fun project and enormously successful, so thank you for being here. Debbie Wynn, I'm so happy that you've come back to us this year, and I'm really delighted that you accepted our invitation, and I'm very happy to have you here. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Kathy. Does everybody hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Kathy's asked me to talk about 2 topics, and you'll have to bear with me. We'll go through a little bit of material, and I think it'll set a stage for a fairly robust conversation. but bear with me, and to some of you who've heard a little bit of this, I apologize. She wants me to talk about why the Hampton Roads Community Foundation changed its direction from just grant making to more community leadership, and specifically why we got interested in economic competitiveness. And secondly, she asked me to talk about civic leadership, right up your alley. Let me go through the first part. We spent a couple of years at the foundation thinking deeply about this community and its needs, and the fact that we had a $250 million endowment. We were granting a lot of $12, $13 million a year in grants to not-for-profits, all very worthwhile, all useful, but it wasn't moving the meter for the community. And we did some surveys with some other major community foundations, found that some of them were more enlightened than we were, and we figured out that it was time for us to get a little more robust. Part of it is that we, and I'll get into this in a minute, the community has not been making great progress. Part of that is because we have a dependency on the military, tourism, and the port, which frequently puts us to sleep because we don't have declines and downturns that other communities have. But if you watch the upticks, we also don't have the upticks other communities have when they're up. As a consequence, we're in a slow decline on a relative basis against both the state and U.S. averages. That's not a good picture when you think of the White's talking about. And both of them relevant to what we're going to be saying here. Why the Hampton Roads Community Foundation? We have a very strong, interested board. We go out of our way to choose people to be on our board who've headed up major organizations in the community. Most of them have done that. They're keenly interested in this community. None of them have any ego needs to participate in anything. They just legitimately want to help the community. You can find that in the list of who they are. I would also say to you that the foundation is probably as close to a permanent organization as we have in this community. We not only have this $250 million endowment, we are remaining in a $2 billion trust that eventually will come to us as well. So that this organization will be here forever and will have an influence on this community, which will be significant. And because of that, we can take a long-term strategic focus. We don't have to worry about election cycles or short-term. We can really look long-term. And at least my experience in government is it is very, very hard for government people to look long-term. Election cycles force them to look on very long, short-term cycles. So that's why. And when you get into economic competitiveness, why that? And again, it seems odd for us to be doing that. There are plenty of other organizations doing that. Why a place that gives out grants? We concluded that if the economy did not become more robust, that the burdens on us and other not-for-profits were going to grow, and that if we could create a rising tide, it would float all boats. And so it's an avoidance of negative social costs, and it's creating more opportunity on the positive side of things. We think it's the most leverageable thing out there. Now, I should tell you at this point, we deliberately did not choose transportation here because it is politically controversial. And we do not want to do that inside of the foundation. There are a lot of reasons for that. We have a lot of donors that are supporting lots of good things that we do not want to turn off. We think that is far better handled by the business and government community. We'll get into that in a bit later. Now, some of you have heard this before. We went out and surveyed about 70 people in town to get their assessment of how we're doing, and the results were not encouraging. The headlines that despite significant efforts of many, and I really mean that, a lot of people have been working very hard, a lot of activities that are important. There was a feeling that there were simply too many overlapping organizations and too little significant progress. In fact, many of you and your organizations are saying they're spending too much money and they're not happy about it in terms of the results that we're seeing. The CEOs of the major companies in our region have become far less engaged as a consequence. And the next generation, really all of you and your progeny and others like you, community leadership was not being developed purposefully. We're doing some stuff, but not in the right way to be sure that we've got a sustained asset here. So, furthermore, when we asked about economic competitiveness, we heard things you've all heard too. And if you have not seen Jim Cook's reports, everybody familiar with that, the State of the Region, get a copy of it. Old Dominion will send it to you. It's an interesting report, primarily not so much because of the editorial comments they made every year, and they could be be right or wrong, but there's a lot of data in here, a lot of good data that's very good to have as you go through your conversations. And as no surprise, we're far too dependent on federal military spending. The port and tourism, 65% more or less of the economy, and we've done little to diversify our economy. And as I said a minute ago, our rate of growth is slower than the state and the U.S. average. And by the way, almost every other major region in the Southeast, just to put it in perspective. Now, in fairness, most of them are regions. It's another whole conversation. Again, almost everybody expects military federal spending to decline. There is no plan, literally no plan to deal with that eventuality, zero. While our port handles more cargo, the strategy we are pursuing effectively ships product elsewhere for the addition of value add. It's different in Savannah and other ports. As a consequence, we are not creating jobs here. Technology has stayed ahead of job creation. The new Maris facility, AV Mobile facility, is operating at about 40% of the staffing at the other terminals. So we're not creating jobs. And yet, it's a huge asset. That's part of the debate that's going on right now at the port. We can answer questions like that later. And in Jim's recent report, he knows a couple of other things. Job growth is slower in Hampton Roads than in the U.S., Virginia, Richmond, Raleigh, Durham, Jacksonville, and Charlotte. And wages and salaries, and this is scary, and the benefits, total compensation really, in Hampton Roads are hugely influenced by our military and federal civilian pay. Those two numbers average $15,000 to $20,000 above our non-military pay. You let that decline and see what happens to our average wages. It is a very serious problem. So, in the face of this, let me just mention that, and we had not intended to do this as we were making this inquiry, but it became obvious we needed to re-engage the CEOs in the community. Frankly, once the Portsmouth tunnels happened to us and we saw the cost of that and business was not involved, we all concluded, wait a minute, man, we can't delegate this just to the politicians because that project is about 40% more expensive than it had to be. I.e., you're seeing the new math on a 460, which is being funded in an entirely different way than it was in Portsmouth tunnel. It's nobody's fault, by the way, we're not blaming anybody, but the truth of the matter is the business community was able and should know it needed to be there. Now, in the midst of that, we then postulated the foundation several areas that we thought needed a renewed focus. Clusters, entrepreneurship, workforce enhancement, military strategy, community image, and leadership development. Now, none of those, I mean, everybody's talked about those things in the past in one way or another. But the truth is, we haven't gotten much done against any of them. And in clusters, everybody here heard Michael Porter. You know, he is Harvard Business School. He's the guy who came up with the quadrants on strategy, business strategy. Well, he's a friend through some other stuff. And so we went to see him, a bunch of us. And they had enormously wonderful databases. Turns out they don't have a single case they can point to where they've had a success in building a cluster. Not one. There are a couple of examples where other communities have done it, but when and then they gave us to a search firm that wanted us to spend $1 million to go back and do stuff we already knew in the community. We asked them for an example. Not one. Now, there is, and here's the reason. In clusters, when you take existing mature businesses and they compete against each other, are they going to share best practices with their competitors? Absolutely not. There are a few soft things like vendor, supply items, that sort of thing, maybe even availability of workforce. But is Newport Ship going to teach their competitors how to have a great workforce, which they've spent a lot of money over the years doing? I don't think so. So there's a lot of illogic in terms of why that can happen. On the other hand, if you have an emerging area, some of us are keenly interested in logistics and modeling and simulation. Given the fact that we've got a port and the military here, I doubt there are many other places that know any more than we do about logistics. And that's just an idea, who knows, but it's emerging. That's when you can get clusters, we think, to work together. We're going to look at that. So clusters, entrepreneurship. Jim Schumadine's in your class. His mother runs Signature and Schumidine. She's got keenly interested in this subject. Ann and I, about 6 months ago, attended a meeting with a few people. They were trying to create yet another angel network. And Ann and I said, please don't do that. It's just not gonna help. We've done that. We need to get some deep thinking and really figure out how we can help in the entrepreneurial thing. Without spending a lot of time, there are a lot of segments in the entrepreneurial piece. One is the VC area, represented by Drew and others. There's a mid part in entrepreneurship, which is the vast majority of businesses that continuously come into the community and are subdividing and redividing local market share. And they're all businesses, service businesses you can think of. And then there is another segment of local businesses that derive almost 100% of their revenue from outside of the market and are creating jobs in the market. It's at the two ends of the barbell that we're most interested in. Incentivizing people to fight for market share among each other is not a good idea. Helping VCs and people at the other end who are entrepreneurial but need help to generate more jobs here, particularly from revenue outside the market, is the ideal scenario. By the way, that revenue outside the market did come from Michael Porter. That is one thing we got out of that focus, that sort of aha moment that helped us in entrepreneurship more there. Workforce enhancement. Everybody knows what's going on in workforce, I suspect. There's an awful lot of federal funding. It is done, for the most part, at the low end of the food chain. We're talking about it at the mid and high end of the food chain, so that we can create this kind of available talent pool that will allow companies to come and stay here and prosper. There's a lot of work in that. We just recently hired a new person at the foundation who spent a lot of time on this, Linda Rice, and worked with Debbie Croce, who also spent a lot of time on it. Debbie Croce is our new CEO. She was out of Tidewater Community College. Linda was sort of her top lieutenant over there for many, many years and brings a lot of expertise to this. Military strategy, we went and met with Admiral Harvey probably a year ago now. And he said it was the first time he'd seen any business people talk about the community in a couple of years. And we used to have a business military organization where we meet a couple of times a year, the CEOs and the major people. And it was a great thing. It went away. And it needs to be reestablished. When we started talking about, he gave me a story. You all read all the headlines of these, how they have to get their jets and planes to land as though they're simulating carriers and so forth. And they can't do it all right here. And they had a deal worked out with Franklin, which at the moment had just lost Union Camp, and they were looking to get something done. He told me all he needed was one fire truck, and Franklin would have done it. And he didn't know who to call. The cities couldn't do it, he couldn't do it. We could have raised that in 10 minutes for him, and that would have been done. So we're starting to have, and by the way, the 3 4-stars in the region, there's the Army, Air Force, and the Navy, are all on the CEO roundtable. And that's a major step in the right direction. There is no military strategy. We sit down and talk about, aren't there things that could be mutually beneficial where we could help each other? Of course, and particularly in transportation. They would tell us, and this is right about why they say this, they're responsible for 200,000 cars being on the road in Hamburg daily. 200,000. And he also said, depending on how you look at light rail, he could probably put 10,000 or 12,000 people on light rail daily if it was extended out to the military base. So there's a lot of stuff here we need to obviously understand what's going on. Community investment. I've lived here my whole life. My family's been here for generations. I love this community. But when we talk about Richmond as Mecca, come on, people. I mean, that's, yes, they spend more money and they get more money to do things, but we have a spirit down here that I would compare to anybody. I mean, we really do. There is a can-do attitude here, and we have people that are very generous given our resources. But when you read, and a lot of people reject the words Hampton Roads because it's a designation as a place, right or wrong. What we don't have is that iconic identification that people can say, I've been there. So why don't we put a canal down Granby Street and connect it to the water? Or why don't we do something big and bold? It's not going to come out of the political workforce. I love, by the way, Paul and Bill and most of these people. It's wonderful to do what they're doing, give it time to do this. We got to move it up, folks. We got to be bolder. We got to think about bigger stuff. And that relates to community image and pride. And it starts with that, and it builds a step at a time. Leadership development, you all know you wouldn't be here if you weren't interested in this subject. I'll talk some more about that in a minute. It's absolutely essential. And to the extent we're talking about change management, it has to be led. People will not hold up their hands and say, I want to change. It does not happen. You all who've been in business know that. It has to be led. And so there's a lot there that we've got to do. All right, the foundation's role is not to do all these things, by the way. It's to find a way to facilitate, bring resources, huddle, hand off at the right times. A good example, if any of you know, I see Susan Hershey on the back. Her husband headed up the effort in early childhood development. Spectacular success in this market. When we started 6 years ago, I think the number was 1 in 10 children were not prepared to go into kindergarten. That was 1 in 5. It was 1 in 5. Today it's 1 in 10. So 100% improvement almost in that period of time. It's just unbelievable. I mean, and to think the long-term impact of something of that magnitude. So we can do that. We've done it before. All right, and we're staffing up to do some of this. All right, let me jump in now to the subject of community leadership. And I'm going to confuse you here, and I apologize, and what I'm going to suggest is complicated. Because it takes some deep thinking. We've got to analyze why is it we haven't made any progress, any major progress. And by the way, under that umbrella, lots of people are doing good things that are helping people. We talk about economic competitiveness and moving those tectonic plates, okay? We're not talking about doing lots of good things that help other people. Many of you in this room are doing that, so please don't take this as any attack, because actually, the truth of the matter is we're extremely appreciative of all those efforts. But we need to create a higher and better platform to work off of. So, how do we think about this? Well, let me just give you sort of the moving parts, and then we'll talk about it. And this is actually the stage that we are at. We've identified those subject areas. We're now trying to figure out how do we activate it? How do we bring the right people, the right groups, the right incentives, the right metrics, by the way, against all of those things? Should we sequence them? Are they in parallel? Is there a low-hanging fruit? All that stuff is going on, right? And then you have to figure out how do you coordinate not-for-profit organizations, with government organizations, with business civic activities, and leadership, and get something that works. So let me just talk about that for a minute. It's not quite as easy as it may sound. It takes a lot of deep thinking to figure out how to make these things, which have very different purposes, very different directions, very different resources. So let me, if you'll bear with me a minute, let me just go through this. Obviously, we've got a lot of great people in our full-time people, by the way, in our not-for-profits, and in our local governments. Most of our not-for-profit organizations have a chair and a board which is made up of volunteers. Those folks are responsible for setting the direction and performance metrics for their respective organizations and for effectively using resources. How many of our not-for-profit organizations have output metrics that are monitored on a regular basis? We find very few. We get grant requests all the time, we ask for it, and it's not there. That worries us a lot in terms of the efficiency of the utilization, the coordination with other organizations that are in the same space. And there are good examples, by the way, too, where people do that quite well. And here's where the rub comes in. And this was another aha moment. People regard, for the most part, civic activities as lower intensity, less important activities that they're willing to do, but they will not have the same standard as they do in their business. They dabble in it, they spend part-time in it, they come to an occasional meeting, but they will not ensure that it gets serious attention and happens. That is a fundamental flaw that has to be corrected if we're going to start making progress in this. You can all relate to it in your own way, but I've seen it time and time again. There are a lot of exceptions. I mean, I've been retired for 10 years. This is all I do, civic stuff. Why do I do that? Well, part of it is I was lucky enough to be successful. I can do it. Other people are still working. They have conflicts with their time and so forth. There's a lot of thinking that we have to figure out how to do this. Full-time staff is the answer. You can't dabble in this stuff. But there's got to be a clear direction, and there's got to be a frequency of involvement at the right level with volunteers, knowing what their role is. And for the most part, volunteers' role is not to do, it's to ask questions, to get clarification from the experts. Too often that doesn't happen. So, on the volunteer side, that's that. On the not-for-profit side, local government, again, a lot of good full-time people. I'm still dealing with the area of economic competitiveness. These folks serve elected officials, and they set the priorities, just as they should. There's a city manager, but the city manager works at the beck and call of elected officials. And local government is highly dependent on state and federal funding. Now, if you are funded by somebody, your likelihood of taking them on in a very serious way and not going along with those policies is pretty low. And so when you see small incremental change and no fighting on certain things that relate to transportation or otherwise, there's a reason. It's called self-interest. It's logical. I'm not criticizing it in the slightest. It's logical. How do we work around that? How do we work around that? There have been some bold things done in this community on the political front, but for the most part, the nature of it is not to be bold. It is small incremental change that allows you, first of all, to maintain continuity, but also to get reelected and to maintain your relationships. Again, I'm not criticizing. That's just a fact. It's just the way it is. Okay, now, business leaders. Now, business leaders are very accustomed, particularly at the highest level, leading change, identifying and nurturing future leaders. That's really what we do. That's what you're supposed to do anyway. When significant change is made in a community, I would suggest to you that business can set a higher bar because of the experience they have in doing these things. They understand change management, how to organize for it. They can provide cover and incentive for local politicians. The local politicians get that, by the way. I mean, we now have business working on transportation to thrift because it can do all this that they can't do. We just talked about a minute ago. And of course, they can provide leadership and resources to help. Now, business is increasingly more complex and competitive. So what will motivate our business leaders, you all, to give more time to this and to use the business standard, not the civic standard as you go about it? Well, there's a short answer. It's called self-interest. Now, that's a big leap, okay? Not just civic responsibility, it's called self-interest. You actually sit down and start to think, whatever your business is, but you need a pool of talent, and they have to have a quality of life for you to maintain it, or the attributes that Drew was talking about, or I could go through a whole series of other things just like that. Your business is dependent on this community, and that is a long-term view, and not many CEOs are in for 10 years. But if you do take a long-term view on this, the self-interest is huge. A second piece of the self-interest, and I believe this my whole life, the great leaders are rooted in continuous learning. They listen to learn, they don't listen to respond. And if we can create vehicles for new learning for more and more people and engagement for those people at a more serious level, not the casual, let's do another rubber stamp and get a dog and pony in this, in this meeting. I think we can also see a higher level of self-interest. There's another one that relates to networking. You all are doing that here. And that's a very important aspect of getting ahead. It's important for the enrichment of your family, but it's also important for your own individual development. We've got to think about that. Okay, and then another question. How do we get civic graduates? I've been asking this, Kathy, this is what, 14th session. I've been asking this for 14 years. And Josh Jordan and I share space with their offices. And I've worked hard on this for a long time. I know Kathy is working on this now, quite seriously. You all get ramped up, you learn a lot, and then you're not put to work. That's a mistake. Because this group has got so much talent, so much ability in so many various areas, and your predecessor likewise. We need to, and there are other groups that do the same kind of thing you're doing here. There's a Lead Virginia, and the Chamber has a program, and so forth. We need to figure out how to get that group activated. And then frankly, people like me and others of us have been spending the last couple of years thinking about how can we get our replacements going. And you can't remember, I think Kevin may know this story, 15 or 20 years ago, I had a meeting with 3 or 4 of us, and I had meetings with the senior leaders on luncheon. And they essentially said, okay, we're done, it's your turn. And we sort of looked at each other and said, come on. And that was it. And these were really great people, by the way, wonderful people. But there was no investment of time, there was no mentoring, there was no plan, there was And the Community Foundation is going to spend some money on this. We're going to see to it that we get the people who are interested, able, and have the time to do this. So that's an important aspect. So when you add all of that up, and I'm sorry I'm talking so long, but when you add all of that up, it's complicated, folks. How do you get those things to work together so that we all come in and bake a good cake? Have something that really does advance us. And of course, you have to be careful. Everybody knows this from any enterprise. You can't do a shotgun blast. You've got to be focused. We've got to have some early success. We've got to create some momentum. We've got to prime the pump on some things before we can haul off and let it go. But that's the magnitude of what we're thinking about long term. And we're now in the process of figuring out, of those 6 things, how can we start those? Are there existing organizations that we can help focus on that? Is there collective action rather than one-off, and so forth? And so, happy to take questions, but that's where we are.
Thank you very much, Debbie. I appreciate it, and thanks to Dwight and thanks to Drew as well. Well, this is where we get a little bit interactive here. So what questions, thoughts, and comments do you have about what you've heard so far this morning? There's a lot of work to do. We've talked about that in terms of our opening retreat as well. There's a lot of work to do. What about this idea of self-interest? What is it that would take, to get you engaged at that level? And I think the other question has to do with your degree of commitment to this process too. So I'd love to hear you talk about it. How concerned are you about what you've been hearing Dwight talk about with regard to the fact that we will very quickly be at a point where there will be more federal dollars on the table that we will not be able to access because we don't have $1 in our transportation fund. It's a pretty critical concern for a community like this. So, thoughts, contributions, suggestions, ideas. Yes, go right ahead, Martha, go ahead.
One of the things that we've encountered over the years, which won't come as any surprise to anyone in this room, I don't believe, is that when you're trying to influence the elected officials to take some risk, move things forward like transportation funding or whatever it may be, and you're trying to use the business community to have that influence, you run into, if you will, the self-interest problem. Unfortunately, it usually works against what we're trying to do as opposed to what we are trying to do. One of the things that's been suggested many times is that businesses withhold campaign funding and support for elected officials who don't do those forward-thinking things that we believe as a group are necessary for the community. How do you deal with that dynamic? Is there a way to overcome that, and is that something you're looking at?
Yes, it's something that we're looking at. It's a critical dynamic. You're right on the money, and it's a bifurcated subject because national companies that run their executives in and out of here are not going to have a PAC that's going to take on the politicians. It's not going to. I mean, and it's not in their best interest to do that. I'm not finding fault with it. It's not in their best interest. They will not get ahead by doing that. Local businesses that have roots here can do it and will do it, and they can sustain through the political cycles. They're strong enough businesses, and those are the people who are either have the personal resources or the companies that have the resources, and we are having those conversations. Northern Virginia has been doing this for 20 years. If you don't deliver their agenda, you don't get reelected because the Northern Virginia group goes and raises money and finds great candidates and they beat you. It's that simple. And you couldn't be more right away. There has to be a consequence. There is not a consequence.
Something to think about. Drew, I wonder, when you were talking about what you're doing in your own company, you didn't discuss any elected leadership in that process. And so I wonder, as you hear this conversation, as somebody who is building in a kind of a different model, I wonder what you think about what you're hearing so far as it relates to your business and the opportunities to grow businesses like it.
Yeah, I think, first of all, hearing that said by Debbie, I don't know, you could have said it any better, is enlightening and puts into perspective a lot of things. I would sort of look at that question and say, even someone like myself who has been, all things considered, relatively successful, I'm a very motivated person and have great aspirations. I'm only just coming into the consideration of all of the things above me. It has only recently dawned on me that I'm part of that next generation you're talking about. It's also relatively recently, and that my continues to get a little bit wider. In the past year or two in particular, and some in the room would know this, my field has grown to local politics and understanding that that's what seems to affect the sphere around me the most. And of course we've got senators stopping by the office now, and so I presume that means we're now looking at statewide issues. So again, you talk about it as priming the pump, and I had not thought of it that way. I sometimes feel a little bit embarrassed when someone asks me, what do you want? And I answer with silly things, seemingly silly things like food trucks or an arts district or bike lanes. But those are those small things, and those are the things that create the momentum and that get people to believe that there's a critical mass of good change happening. And for though the overall, I think, impression of this panel maybe sounds a little bit, I don't want to say negative, but maybe it's overall we're sort of saying there's alarm. I would also say there's a lot of, in my opinion, maybe this will be helpful, that there's a change in perception coming around, and that these small victories are indeed having a big impact on the perceptions of my fellow young professionals. And I got an email not 3 weeks ago from a friend in Virginia Beach, and Kathy, you'll appreciate this probably the most. She said, Drew, you're so close to it, and I know you personally, you are probably frustrated by the pace of change, but I'm looking at it from a little bit outside of what you're doing and what people who are in your immediate circle are doing, and collectively that is a huge change, and that we are looking at this region and particularly the city of Norfolk in a totally different way, and feel compelled to invest in it too. And so all of those small and seemingly small but incremental changes, I think, do have an effect.
We were talking yesterday about this, the fact that, and you will remember this time, Debbie, and you will too, Dwight, the time when it cost a toll to call from one side of the water to the other. I mean, it's really extraordinary to think about that. Go ahead, Aubrey.
Dwight, it's not a transportation question, so.
Aubrey Lane's the Hampton Roads representative.
I would like you to
for
talk about
transportation.
evolution later, but when you get a chance. But, Debbie, Dr. Cook's report spends a lot of time talking about education in Hampton Roads. Particularly this year, he's looking at private schools in the area, 76 some on this side of the water, 50 some on the other side of the water. We also read today's paper, and I talked with Dr. Evans here, somewhere this morning about our schools and how they're comparing, and we know we have issues in terms of, hey, the standards keep changing. And I know you mentioned lifelong education in that regard, but are you looking at, we all know, just like in transportation, we pretty much know what we need to do in education, but there seems to be barriers where we don't. Is that going to be, part of, you mentioned Smart Beginnings, is that,
Yeah.
those leaders getting together?
The short answer is no on K through 12 at the moment, and let me tell you why. We're closer to the workforce, the time frame of that, and there are enough challenges in just getting a qualified workforce that's gotten through high school. And don't misunderstand me, the issue you're raising is huge important. I mean, it's really right at the core of everything long term. But if we're going to work on the economy, and if we're going to get some things done politically, they need to be able to see it. I mean, the hardest thing for early childhood for politicians to buy into something is 15 years off, and it's just really hard. And so we are talking about education as an example. I've been after the state for a while to create a virtual online university. There's no interest. Well, we can do that here. And that, if we did it with the community colleges and the other resources that are here, and businesses could get, to make commitments to take some of the outputs on some of these things, so we could start to make some things happen here. I happen to agree with you on K through 12. It's absolutely, if you had to identify a crisis problem long term, that would probably be it. The declining against, everybody knows the OECD, the developed countries, we're declining like a rock in terms of the percentage of our population that are both college degree with quality and who also have the math and other skills, cognitive, English, writing, all those things that we just lose it. It's more important to countries that don't have it than it is to a country that already has it. So, but the short answer is not anymore.
We're going to be, just so you know, Aubrey, we just did an interview that I think will air next week with Khan of Khan Academy. Really interesting project he's working on. It started with him tutoring his niece in math because she didn't do as well in one of these high-stakes tests in 6th grade, so her life was, projected to be an unmitigated disaster from that point forward. So he was tutoring her, got her squared away, and then started just putting these videos online, for tutoring purposes. It just exploded, and his idea is free education. All these videos are free. And it's been very interesting to watch this thing explode. And his contention is we really need to rethink the way we do education, because we are asking education to do 3 things. We're asking them to do learning, we're asking them to do socializing, we're also asking education to credential. And he says it's that credentialing piece that he sees the potential to change in terms of opening that opportunity for. So that's going to be on next week, so I invite you to do it. Let me go ahead back here to Chuck. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to try and connect the 3 of you a little bit. Drew, I'm in the Navy, so I'm a complete outsider to Norfolk. I've only lived here 12 years, and I didn't grow up with Pete Decker, so I might as well be French. I live here, Drew, and I just transitioned from the Navy, and I'm working very hard to stay here, by the way, but because of what you said, it's not the big things, it's the little things. It's Crackers up on Granby, it's Bella and those sorts of places. So good on you. And I would encourage, and I'm nowhere near the intellect that's on the table up there, so I would encourage you two to think the same way. The lesson I've learned from living here, I'm in a bunch of nonprofits, I'm one of those guys that may be the problem, not the solution necessarily. But the key is you can't help people that don't know they need it, so focus on the people that know they need it. A couple examples. We did Dreamkeepers Academy here in Norfolk. Newport News did Achievable Dream. Achievable Dream has hit the ball out of the park. Kids from the worst situations are in the top 90% of the state scholastic scores here. Dreamkeepers Academy in Norfolk failed. Dwight, another example is you got the mayors together and all those guys, they know they need food. They know they need it. It's not those guys that need to be enthusiastic about the transportation. It's not even the people here, the CEOs. Mike McClellan, the intermodal guy from Norfolk Southern, he knows he needs good tunnels. I need a good tunnel as a citizen because I can't get to work. I'm the guy you got to convince. I'm the guy that needs to know that I need help. So I'd be interested on how you guys are going to focus on finding those people that know they need it, using them, Debbie, as the leaders, leading the people that want to be led so that the people that don't know they need leadership can see it and move forward.
This might be a great place to talk about the O2 referendum as well.
You want me to do it?
Please.
Dwight's the expert, so he can correct me on all this. He's the dictionary on this. I'm not. We had an O2 referendum that got crushed. It was poorly organized. We really had an assumption Northern Virginia did at the same time. That was to get a tax through so that we could build a certain number of projects, including the third crossing, by the way, at the time. Since then, we've gone to school on this quite a bit. There's a lot of learning over there, particularly since the meltdown in 07, by the way, of other communities. With 65% run rate, we've gotten bond issues to improve transportation, increase revenues. Dwight said, we're broke. Okay, and you can't get it out of rocks. We've got to figure out a way to get some revenue here to make this work. And fortunately, the Portsmouth Tunnel has teed up a nice situation for us here. People have made us help with that, just to be honest, and they understand it. 460 is better, but it's not the third crossing. It's not where the bottleneck really exists. It is for a lot of the transportation moving out here, but not for individuals. So here's what we're doing. The CEO roundtable, the primary interest of that group is transportation. It's the reason we got back together. And by the way, I don't even know why I'm not a CEO. I mean, I'm retired, but anyway, I'm involved. So what we're doing now, we've asked Bruce Bradley to coordinate with Dwight. They're doing that. We're having a series of 3 meetings, 3 phases to this whole thing. First phase is sort of situation analysis. Let's really figure out what's happening and know something rather than just read the papers and anecdotal stuff and so forth. Let's get some deep knowledge. They have the deep knowledge. So we'll have that. We'll be ready for the General Assembly session. The second phase, and it's probably not this General Assembly session, is get the General Assembly to authorize us to do something again that is both constitutional and with a lockbox and things that will allow us. Most of us, and we could be dead wrong, but at the moment, most of us have no confidence that the state's going to take care of our problems. Okay? And certainly there's no interest. I mean, he can tell you that the elected officials in the Richmond area have got roads to beat the band. I mean, they don't really think they have a problem. And they're not as interested in this as we in Northern Virginia are. But we in Northern Virginia do have a majority of the votes in the General Assembly if we do some of the things we were talking about. So the second phase is to figure out how to get that done. That probably involves raising money. The third phase is a detailed grassroots segmented marketing effort to get the thing approved. And we didn't do that last time. A lot of us that have been in marketing knew we should have done it. And it's all the things you're talking about. Dwight will tell you the story that in the last time he went around the whole CIVIC groups, most of them were negative when he went in there because they didn't have facts. By the time they had a chance to understand what was going on, they were, for the most part, positive. And we're going to have to do that 1,000 times if we're serious about this. We can't just rely on some frustration in the market. But I would say to you that all of us understand that if we don't eliminate that bottleneck in this community, all the other things we're talking about are going to be diminished.
I want to underscore that comment about, and Dwight, perhaps you'd like to expound on that, what's happening. We've gone to civic leagues and really presented the facts, because that was missing from the O2 for the average person out there. I can remember being on the radio and people would, I would talk with folks who were in the leadership of that campaign, and well done, who said, oh, this thing's going to pass. And I was hearing on my show, it was 50-50, and I thought kind of a little more like 53. So I don't know about that. And sure enough, you know, if we don't get to that level, I think that we have a big problem.
We got 35% of the vote.
Kathy, I told Debbie and Bruce and Harry Lester and some others the story about going to 33 presentations, 33 groups in 30 days behind the offices of the partnership. And when I came out, I told Barry Bishop, called me the day before the referendum. He said, what do you think? I said, it's going to fail 2-1. It's my gut instinct on conversion. Trained conversion thinker. I'm loving this diversion stuff. Really stuff. And let me get to the gentleman's remarks over here about how all this comes together. I go in, and they were just throwing rocks at me, and I said, look, I'm not here to state a point other than give you the facts. And then they stood there afterwards and said, oh my God, I wish I'd known. Well, then, after that, when we were reflecting and we had a community conversation where we surveyed thousands of people, I told my staff, look at the data. When you look at all of in this transmission referendum, if you look at all of the severe congestion points and add all of those people up, they only constitute 34% of all the trips made in the region. So the other 66% don't know there is a severe problem or don't experience it, and when they get into what I call first-person pronoun, are not convinced they need to vote yes on the referendum. So our challenge here is, how do you get to those 66% who don't experience it every day and say it's in your best interest to rise this community to a level where you will profit from this yes vote? But I don't know how you do that.
Well, I think a piece of that is to begin to communicate the facts through leadership. I mean, that is a piece of this. And I will tell you, there were a couple of strains of opposition last time around, and if we do, we've started actually raising this issue on the air, just saying, hey, what do you think? How do you think that vote would go today? What if that referendum were there to vote on? Well, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Just to see what people are saying, and you're starting to hear people say, yeah, I get it. It's a different time, 10 years on, you know, there's a lot that changes over time. The things that it seems to me, based on the opposition from last time, that would need to be addressed are around enough of environmental play, because I think there was a strain of opposition that felt that there was not enough in that proposal around light rail and ideas to get cars off the road. There was a lockbox issue, people who just did not trust state government.
Lockbox means that the monies would be restricted only to these projects, could not be fungible.
And in this area, people were very distrustful. At that point, they were distrustful of VDOT. and they were distrustful of the General Assembly to do that. And then there was a strain of thought that was sort of constitutional in nature, which is to say, there were people who said, look, that's the General Assembly's job. I am fundamentally and philosophically opposed to us having to tax ourselves. So it was really, and then you had people who just said, I don't want to pay it because I'm okay in my neighborhood, so why do we need to do that? So some very interesting elements that came together for that. We are, Susan, I'm going to get your question and and then we're probably going to have to wrap because I want to be respectful of folks' time. So.
I'll be quick. I really thank you, and I see that the synergy between the three of you. And I think that one of the things that I learned when I was in CIVIC 10 years ago is that really what brings a lot of these initiatives together are all these collaborations. I mean, that's what makes early childhood work, because it wasn't just an education initiative. It became an initiative with a partnership between the education department, social services department, the cities, all these Vision 2040 that just took place and is taking place in Virginia Beach. Same thing, lots of collaborations. I'm really thrilled to listen to you, Drew, because so many young people that I know, although they're very brilliant and they have a lot of wonderful ideas, they are stuck in this very narrow scope and can't see outside the box. And I think that's truly one of the definitions of leadership and what we need to do to move forward. And to get our place, our area to look like, for example, I was recently in Greenville, South Carolina, up in the mountains in western South Carolina, northwestern South Carolina, and where I know you'd never know this from my New York accent, but I was actually born there. And it's an amazing, there's an amazing mixed-use community. There's arts, there's things going on in the town square. It's an amazing place, and that's why people want to go to live there. My point really is this. I learned when I first came here, a few years later, I participated in CIVIC, and I'm so excited that so much of the CIVIC class is here. And it's such a gift to be able to meet all of these people and to make all these networking opportunities and to do all these collaborations. And I really feel that these collaborations and partnerships are what move things forward. One other quick comment is that I also feel that one of the great responsibilities of our leaders, and so many of us here are leaders of initiatives and boards, are to develop that succession. I think that if you are a leader of a board and you have not developed a succession plan and you do not encourage younger people, generational people, and diverse types of people from diversity in terms of regionally, geographically, obviously, age-wise, that I think is one of the major responsibilities also, and that sometimes is short-sighted. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah, I think you would all say, agreed, right? And this gets to what New was saying a moment ago here offline, which has to do with how we move from thinking of ourselves as individuals to thinking of ourselves as part of a community that's engaged in collaboration, to think of ourselves in groups that have influence and impact. Because in truth, it really is not the individual as much as it is what happens when you get that synergy pulled together. So I guess the bottom line of this is be aware of what's coming down the road, and when you get the opportunity to participate and engage, take it, and understand the power of combined efforts in terms of what we can do for the region. Any closing comments before we release people on their way?
First of all, thank you all for being here and taking the time to do this. And figure out how to contribute. Figure out how to come out of here and work on something with a group of human peers that makes a difference. I mean, it is a thousand lives in many ways, but it's even more than that. And big things can happen. I mean, I can give you examples, and particularly where there's a void, big things can happen because there's no opposition to this void. So I urge you to give some thought to that. And the second thing I would say to you, and I've said this for years and I really believe it in my heart, the most selfish thing you can do as a citizen is help somebody else. It makes you feel so good, deep down, to reinforce that you're actually got the right values. And you're not just concerned about hedonism, which is rampant, this kind of thing. You're concerned about quality of life in your community and others. And I just tell you, I mean, you don't have to talk to anybody about it, but deep down you know. And I would really encourage you to think about that. Take some action and help some others. So,
Thank you, Jeff. Dwight?
Just want to let everyone know, if you have a pencil and a piece of paper, write this down. third Thursday of every month except for probably February, August, and December. All of the elected leadership of the 16 communities, meaning the mayors and chairs, come together in our boardroom on the other side of the interstate from here at 723 Wood Lake Drive and discuss those things of regional significance. It's the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, not the transportation side that I work on, but the Planning District Commission. So the third Thursday at 9:30 for 58 minutes, that's all they give me of their time before they start gonging the bell. It's an open meeting. It's the HRPDC.gov website has a YouTube video of the proceedings. There is public comment opportunity. I'll leave with my frustration, and Suzanne will tell you because she facilitated, along with Jim Oliver and her team, for the first time ever, facilitated strategic planning session of those 16 communities' elected officials, where we tried, you all tried to get them to think collaboratively and collectively, and my frustration is very quickly they revert back to first person pronoun with regard to what's best for their community. So you can come and make a 3-minute statement every month if you'd like. Just don't tell them I sent you. And Drew, how about you?
Yeah, I struggle to try to follow W. It's like listening to myself when I'm wise and can communicate a clear thought. To come where that happens. But within this group this room is a group full of people who have means and who have energy and maybe both. And I continue to think that that's the biggest challenge that we face. I know a lot of people with energy and not means, and I'm just starting to meet some folks with the means to help make those things happen. Leverage a group like this to bring those ideas to fruition.
Drew, I think you said it very well. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in thanking our panelists? More than your custom 58 minutes, but I thank you so much for coming this morning. Those of you who are in the class of 2013, this is the time you want to go to your rooms and get your luggage out, put it in your cars, and we will reconvene at 10 a.m. And we will need to vacate this room because they're going to be setting this up for our tattooing ceremony. Oh, I'm sorry. Oops. Thanks so much for coming.